Well, good evening, everyone. It is great to see a bustling crowd in the school board room tonight. This is a public meeting of the School Board of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to the meeting, notice of the time, place, date, and subject matter of this meeting was posted at the entrance doors of the Education Service Center and on the district website. It was also sent to the West Bend Community Memorial Library, the Daily News, WRYU, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources that have requested notice of our meetings. I'm just going to pause to ask Superintendent Wimmer to confirm that this meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a number of attendees joining us remotely. So what I just wanted to do first of all is take a roll call here because we also have a few individuals who are absent. So Dr. Temez is absent, but we expect him to join later. And Ms. Lang is absent and excused as well. But I'll call the rest of the roll for purposes of calling this virtual meeting to order. Ms. Aragot? Here. Thank you. Mr. Donaldson? Here. Ms. Kruger?
Here.
Mr. Swigert is here. And Mr. Jenkins?
Here.
Great, thank you. So we recognize a quorum of our board with 5 members present, 1 virtual, and the remainder here. So all of our votes tonight will be cast by roll call. And so Melanie's going to throw a stapler at me or something if I forget to do that. So thank you for that. All right. So with that, in advance of the pledge, Mr. Jenkins, we would just ask if you would mute your microphone and your camera. We will then rise to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next on our agenda is consider the approval of the agenda, which was published in advance. I would move to approve this agenda. Is there a second? Melanie, thank you for the second. We have a motion and second to approve the agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none, I will call the roll. Mr. Swigert votes yes. Ms. Kruger?
Yes.
Dr. Temez is absent. Ms. Lang is absent. Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Aragot?
Yes.
And Mr. Donaldson? Yes. Thank you. The agenda is approved, and we will proceed. We start tonight with recognition. We have a number of recognitions, and we're excited for them. We're going to begin with state recognition for West Bend boys swim and dive. And I believe Ms. Erin Felber, who's here in Chambers, is going to come to the podium and is going to walk us through this presentation. Good evening to you.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having us. Both Ms. Hanks and myself are super excited to be here to recognize some of our co-op teams. And we will start out with Coach Jim Soxie, our head varsity swim coach, and Coach Pete DeTunk, our head diving coach. If they could come on up, and all of our state qualifiers. I think Ms. Wimmer told you what to do, but you guys are going to kind of stand facing that way, surround them on both sides.
That's right. Come on through. And you can feel free to come to the other side if you'd like, or there is fine.
Well, as they're trying to get organized.
Herding cats.
I'm Coach Jim, and I want to thank the board for having us tonight. And first, I want to congratulate all the fall and winter sports for all their great accomplishments. And then I want to introduce my coaches. Coach Pete DeTunk is our diving coach. He's just awesome. And my awesome assistant coach, Jen Meyer. Things would not roll with me anymore if I wouldn't have such great people by my side. I also want to thank Ms. Felberg, Ms. Hanks, for all the great support they give the boys swim and dive team. This year, Ms. Felber really bent over backwards to help us out when the pool was down, finding a pool for us to practice in, and then arranging bus to take us to Port Washington. It really made life easier for me. She also came and helped cheer on our team at the state meet. I also want to thank Dr. Wimmer for all her support. She did a first for me, and I am the dinosaur of coaches here in the district and probably throughout the state. She did a first for me and came to the state meet to cheer on our team. I do not get many firsts in my life anymore, usually health problems, but this was a really great one. I also want to introduce our captains before we get into the state qualifiers. One did not qualify for state, but I asked them to be here because our captains are so important to our team. Ryan Alft, Weston Keppert, Ian Ressler, and Joel Walter. They provided outstanding leadership all season long. And now for what you've been waiting for, our state qualifiers. We had 9 young men qualify for the state this year. Divers Joel Walter and Gavin Perush, swimmers Ian Ressler, Jay Perush, Colton Malter, Wesley Aleth, Drew Gundrum, and Dawson Walters. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Coach Pete to talk about the divers.
Well, the dive-in meet was an amazing experience again. Gavin Perush was the only freshman to qualify for the state meet this year. He finished 24th, and his teammate Joel Walters, senior, he finished 20th at the meet, and they just had a great time. They performed well. They had an outstanding season. Joel was the conference diver of the year, and at our conference meet, he had a brilliant performance. He beat the state champ in Division II, one of the Cedarburg boys, at the conference meet, and he rightly earned his place as diver of the year. Now to the swimmers.
All right. I do apologize. This might take a little while, and I might get a little emotional. The guys already know all about that. In swimming, I'm going to go through the individual events first. Wesley Aleth was 22nd in the 100 freestyle. Weston Keppert was 11th in the 200 IM and 8th in the 100 backstroke. Both are all-state honorable mention. Drew Gundrum was 7th in both the 100 freestyle and the 100 backstroke. Both are all-state honorable mention. Dawson Walters was 4th in the 200 freestyle, which is all-state and all-American consideration. And he was 3rd in the 100 butterfly, which is all-state and all-American. Consideration, all the applications are sent in for both. We'll see what happens. Usually, if it's all-American, that's what it stays. Our relays, 200 freestyle relay, which consisted of Colton Malter, Ian Ressler, Jay Perush, and Wesley Aleth, took 19th. Our 400 freestyle relay of Wesley Aleth, Weston Keppert, Drew Gundrum, and Dawson Walters took 2nd, which is all-state and all-American consideration. And our 200 medley relay, I kind of mixed them up. The medley relay is the first event after diving, but we had quite the meet. The 200 medley relay of Drew Gundrum, Weston Keppert, Dawson Walters, and Wesley Aleth took 2nd, which is all-state and all-American. This gave us a total finish of 5th place with 140 points, which is the highest ever in the Division I boys swimming and diving state meet that the West Bend team has ever taken. A couple of other accomplishments I am proud to announce are, one of them was announced already. We are all North Shore Conference boys varsity and junior varsity champions. To make this even better, Joel Walter was also announced as the boys' diver of the year, and Dawson Walters, they're not related, is the North Shore boys' swimmer of the year. We are leaving the North Shore Conference in grand style. This has been an amazingly awesome way to celebrate my 50th year of coaching high school swimming for my hometown, West Bend. Thank you very much.
Superintendent Wimmer, I think you may have something to present to.
So if you know anything about Coach, you receive an email following every meet. You receive an annual packet of every stat known to any swimming anywhere. And you know that I can make them cry at the drop of a hat. So the stats I'd like to share with you are from your resume submitted in 1975. Come on up, Coach. On behalf of the board and the administration, we'd like to thank you and recognize 50 years of service.
Thank you very much.
I got a couple cute stats. So he's going with 50 years of service, probably not to age himself, but when you look back in the files, he actually lifeguarded starting in 67. So I feel like you could have tacked on 8 more. I don't know. But some of the stats he had a great resume, you guys. You should see this. But I enjoyed on the last page where he was talking about his own awards and distinguishments because he did go to our schools as well. Lettering as a junior and senior in swimming. He was the captain of our swim team in high school. He received bronze and silver awards in both acting and drama. Did you know that about him? One of my favorites, so he also was recognized by the WIA for being perfect about the athletic code throughout all 4 years of high school. Please take note, everyone. And his hobbies and interests at the time were swimming, weight training and lifting, soccer, running, and model railroading. So there's a few stats about your coach that you maybe didn't know from his 1975 resume. He was hired formally in the district January of 1975, but again, he started with us way back when he was in high school in the pool. So he's been there a long, long time. So again, on behalf of the board and the administration, we just want to thank you for that dedication and service to your student athletes and to our district. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It hits the heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Wimmer. We also had scheduled tonight a state recognition for the West Bend ski team. We needed to reschedule that. So we're going to move forward with our final recognition for the evening, which is the West Bend snowboarding team. And I believe Ms. Felber is going to walk us through that presentation as well.
All right, Hunter might not have 50 years yet, but he's still a great coach. So I'm going to call up our snowboarding team, who had an awesome run at the state meets, to be recognized, and our head coach, Hunter Zaskowski.
All right, sorry about my voice, just got over a cold. But I also want to say I do have my assistant coach, Brian Pomeroy, with me as well. And then let's just start off by announcing our girls' team. So we have Addison Turzak. Why don't you guys raise your hands? So Addison, you got Alexis Rothel, Florine Amble, who's a foreign exchange student from the Netherlands, Taylor Calloway, and Chloe Rummel. Our boys' team consists of Will Kaiser, Quinn Benedict, Conrad Doherty, Gavin Schaubel, who's not here, he's at work, and then Max Dahlberg. I guess I'll explain a little bit about our season for those of you that don't know. We go through our normal race season and we do 12 events. So we race slalom, giant slalom, and border cross. Our normal conference races are 4 of each event. And we go into that and basically finish that up beginning of February, and then we go to the state championship, which was 2 weekends ago. Some conference results that I have to share for top 3 podium stuff with conference. I have our women's team overall combined took 2nd place in all 3 events. And Chloe Rummel, who's a senior, she finished 1st on the podium for border cross. So in top 3 men's results, the boys did 1st in border cross on the podium, 2nd in slalom and giant slalom. And then individually, we have Gavin Schaubel 1st in border cross and 3rd in slalom and giant slalom. And then we have Max Dahlberg, who got 3rd in border cross as well. On to our state results. We went to state, raced against 96 other athletes and 10 teams. And our women's team combined together finished 4th overall as a team, just missing the podium. Moving on to our boys' team as a whole, or total, they finished on the podium, getting 3rd place at the state meet. Moving on to women's individual top 15 results. I have Chloe Rummel, who did 2nd in border cross, 8th in giant slalom, 8th in giant slalom, 4th in slalom, and finished 4th overall at the state meet. I also have Florine Amble, who finished 13th in border cross, 14th in giant slalom, and 14th overall. For her to, I just want to say something about her, like for her to come in out of country and to be a part of our team and be like totally with the group, and everyone enjoyed her being around. She did an awesome job, and she presented our team and our school district very well. Moving on to boys individual for top 15. I have Gavin Schaubel. He finished 4th in border cross, 2nd in slalom, and 14th overall. Will Kaiser, who finished 5th in border cross and 15th overall, and Max Dahlberg, who finished 6th in border cross. Overall, we had a really good season. A little bit smaller team this year. I'm hoping we grow this next season going into next year. Other than that, I just want to thank you guys for your time and giving us an opportunity to recognize our athletes.
Well, thank you to our students for coming tonight and sharing some of your time with us. We know it's a school night, and to the coaches for teaching all these individuals about hard work and dedication. And Coach Jim, I think my guess is that would apply in your case to hundreds for sure of students, and maybe even in the thousands. I guess I haven't done the math, but it's greatly appreciated. So this is a public meeting, and we always encourage people to stay, but we know it's a school night, and I understand, is there like a celebration banquet or something tonight somewhere? So anyone who cares to depart at this time may do so without offending us. We'll just pause for a moment, and we'll reconvene here in a moment with our student report shortly. So we have the room kind of clearing out here. All right, and how about as the room clears out, we're going to get ready for our next agenda item, which is our student representative reports. And we have 2 representatives here tonight. We're going to start with Amaya Turner. And Amaya, you are a senior with East, is that correct? Great, you're going to update us on a couple of things. Why don't you get settled, and when the room clears out, you can proceed when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, today I will be sharing with you guys our student life and academics, as well as information about our clubs and co-curriculars. We had an engineering and healthcare fair on February 14th, where students could meet and learn about local engineering and healthcare companies and colleges and universities that offer both types of programs. We also recently had a WBSD Way breakfast that welcomed local businesses as a thank you to our community partners. Each student won at a Scholastic Art Award. Vincent Zebers, a junior at East High School, won several Gold Key Awards through the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. Vincent submitted 3 drawings and 1 ceramic piece and won a Gold Key for each one. Vincent received his awards at a ceremony at the Milwaukee Art Museum on February 8th, and his pieces will be on display until the end of the month, so they just recently got off display. Next, Vincent's work will be at the national award level. On February 27th, we had our Rock and Jazz Fest in the auditorium, and this performance was given by the Silverbrook Viking Band, Badger Jazz Band, Pulse Jazz Band, WB3 Brass Band, and featured a special guest, Andrew Spatafora. Our East Varsity Dance team also hosted their Dancing with Our Stars on February 21st at the Silver Linings Art Center and showcased their dance moves. As for clubs and co-curriculars, we want to recognize Elise Rudell and Gabe Bestful, as each were a part of the NSDA Honor Society, and each new degree represents hours of learning, practice, and improvement by the students, and thanks to their dedicated coaching. FBLA is state-bound, and the chapter had great regional success at the Sheboygan Falls High School last week. Out of 29 schools, East and West finished 4th overall, and 25 students to represent the chapter amongst the competitive events. 15 of those students placed top 3 and will now be moving on to the state leadership conference. Skills USA also hosted their regional competition at North Central Technical College, and the following students qualified for state: Colin Schabel, Declan Sierra, Brady Schabel, Ileana Niguez, Mason Fetcher, Ryder Margalowski, and Alex Lukasevich. Last week, we also had our charity week. So Monday's charity was the Washington County Humane Society. Tuesday was St. Vinny's. Wednesday was Big Brothers and Big Sisters. Thursday was the Children's Foundation of Wisconsin. Friday was Wisconsin Guardian Foundation. And for Saturday, for the charity dance, it was the Full Shelf Food Pantry. We also had our Little Shop of Horrors play that ran the week of February 14th through the 16th and was a major success. And to finish off, on February 26th, TMJ4 interviewed 2 students from our multicultural club to promote the annual Black History Month event. And many attendees came and enjoyed singing and dancing on stage, as well as special performances by both students and members of the Milwaukee area. Thank you.
Thank you. We also invite forward our second speaker tonight, Kate Stram. And Kate, first of all, did I pronounce your name correctly? Yeah. Excellent, because normally I don't. And can you tell us which school you represent and what grade level you're in?
I'm a West Junior.
Fantastic. The floor is yours.
All right, so I'm covering athletics. So East Dance Team placed at state at the Wisconsin Association of Cheer and Pom. Last weekend, the East High School Dance Team earned 4th place in Division II Kick, 6th place in Division II Jazz, and 7th place in Division III Pom. In addition, seniors Gia Burgos, Reagan Cunningham, Michaela Schroeder, and Aubrey Turcott made the All-State team with their solos. And the East Dance Team also competed in the NDA National Competition in Orlando and were semifinalists in 2 of their performances. The Wisconsin Volleyball Coaches Association has awarded girls on the West High School volleyball team all academic individual awards. To qualify, players must demonstrate active participation on the team and complete the fall semester with a 3.5 GPA or higher. There were 5 players that maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA: Maddie Abel, Kylie Altendorf, Ava Banks, Amelia Dubé, Paige Guzzi, and Breely Estruck. West Senior Kylie Altendorf was recently named the Max Preps Volleyball Player of the Year. She was the 27th ranked player in the state. Kylie received the career milestones of 1,000 digs, 1,000 kills, and 1,000 service received passes while a Spartan, and was named First Team All North Shore Conference, Prep Dig Player of the Week, AVCA All-Region Team, and WVCA All-State Honorable Mention. West Senior basketball player Carson Bauer has achieved a triple crown this season by becoming the record holder for the most points scored in a game, a season, and a career. The West Boys basketball team will be hosting a regional basketball game this Friday, March 7th. They finished the regular season with 14 wins, which is the most wins the program has seen this century. At state wrestling this past weekend, wrestlers Jack Lubinsky placed 5th at 106 pounds, and Ethan Bass won state at 120 pounds and is now a 2-time state champion. For the first time in East wrestling history, sophomore Kaylin Kozlowski qualified for sectional tournament. She's a female wrestler. And West gymnast Ella Genesee qualified for individual state on the uneven bars, and the East gymnastics team qualified for state as a team, with Maddie Rummel and McKenna Orth qualifying in all-around, and Lucy Merrill qualifying on beam. The East bowling team, the East boys bowling team qualified for state, and West boys bowler Jared Becker will be going individually. The West Bend Ice Bears boys hockey team finished 3rd in the conference this year and were recognized with the Conference Sportsmanship Award. Lakeshore Lightning girls hockey finished 4th in the conference this year, and boys and girls track and field, the first spring sport starts today. And that is all I have. Thank you for listening to all the great things.
Well, thank you, Kate, and thank you, Amaya, for coming tonight and keeping us connected to what's going on in the district. We absolutely appreciate it very much. And the same offer stands. If it's a school night and you need to sneak out, we're not offended, but stay as long as you would like. Thank you again. All right. With the conclusion of our student rep reports, we move then to public participation. I do not have any comment cards, and I see none in the gallery, so we will move then to our consent agenda. We have a number of items on our consent agenda tonight. Several relate to Head Start. These are generally routine. I will call off what is on the consent agenda and then ask if there are questions or items that should be removed from the consent agenda for discussion. On our consent agenda tonight, minutes of the February 17th, 2025 regular board meeting and executive session. Minutes of the February 27th, 2025 special board meeting. We have no contracts, no resignations, no retirements tonight. We have Head Start Community and Self-Assessment, Head Start Bus Monitor Waiver, Head Start Basic Grant Refunding Application. Let's turn my pages here. We have Head Start Training and Technical Assistance Plan, Head Start Selection Criteria. We also have an item related to Weight Room Booster Club signage. And then lastly, disbursements posted to February 28th, 2025. I'll pause to ask if there are any questions on any of the items on the consent agenda. Hearing none, I would move to approve this consent agenda. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Donaldson. We have a motion and second to approve this consent agenda. I will call the roll, but I will pause first to recognize that I see that Dr. Temez did join us. Superintendent Wimmer, you made note of the time. He joined us some time ago. Excellent. So with that, I will now call the roll. Ms. Ergot. Yes. Dr. Temez.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Jenkins.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Kruger. Thank you. Ms. Lang is absent. Mr. Swigert votes yes. And Mr. Donaldson.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries. The consent agenda is hereby approved. We move then to reports. Our first report is a compensation update. Mr. Lenny Hansen, our assistant superintendent, will give that update. Good evening to you.
Good evening. As you recall from last Thursday, the board took action on pay increases for the 24-25 school year. That was approved that night and then communicated to staff last Friday. Staff will be in the coming days receiving personalized letters that detail how that impacts them. We are processing right now, and new pay amounts, retro pay is all going to be appearing for staff on the March 27th paycheck. And again, as we said on Thursday, I want to thank everybody who participated in the process and the work to get this done, including the representatives from the WBEA who participated in the negotiation side of that process, our board member liaisons, Ms. Kruger and Mr. Donaldson for participating in that process, everybody in the central office who helps process that, and then also the board for their flexibility to get a special meeting scheduled and on the books so that we could get that approved and get things moving to process that as quickly as possible. So that's the end of my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Hansen? I think the board echoes the thanks to all the parties involved. We're glad that this has moved forward and administration is processing everything. So we appreciate all of your efforts as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We move then to our next report, which is the Policy Committee report, and I will give that report. The Policy Committee met on Tuesday, February 25th, and this is a little bit of a preview because many of those items are going to be on tonight's agenda. either for first reading or for further discussion. So the committee reviewed the 200 series of policies, and those related to administration. We also reviewed several of the 700 series related to support services. There are a couple of items where we will need some board input, and that is on Board Policy 119, High School Configuration Process, and Board Policy 830, which is use of facilities. Both we're going to ask for discussion and input from the board. Those are on the agenda later tonight. That would conclude my policy committee report. Other policy committee members, if there's anything else to add or any questions from others. Great. Hearing none, we will have opportunity to look at these in greater detail later. All right, we'll move then to our next report, which is the superintendent's report. Superintendent Wimmer.
Just a reminder of some important deadlines. Both deadlines are March 21st, so keep that in mind. The Volunteer Center of Washington County's Champions of Change event honors volunteers that are changing our community. Last year, our High School Youth Impact Club won an award, as well as our high school science teacher, Skip Clark. There are 11 categories, such as Team Spirit, Power of One, Legacy Award, Rising Star, and Unsung Hero. Nominations are due March 21st. Those nominations can be made on the Volunteer Center of Washington County website. All the awards are given out at the Champion of Change event on May 8th. So again, those are the Volunteer Center of Washington County awards. The next are our very own Rolf's Education Foundation Awards and Support Employee of the Year Awards. They're also awarded in May, but nominations are due March 21st. So this is the 54th year of the Rolf's Education Foundation Awards, which honor exceptional teaching ability in the West Bend School District. 4 awards will be given out. The Support Employee of the Year Awards recognize outstanding contributions to the district from someone in the following employee groups, whether it's aides, facility, transportation, clerical, professional, technical, or school nutrition. Community members, staff, and students can nominate an employee for an award to recognize their outstanding contributions. That nomination form is on our website, so take a look. Again, those are both due March 21st. And then you heard the students speak about the various charities that Charity Week supported. We've had some unofficial tallying and results, and then just today, Mr. Clark, who really helped spearhead Charity Week on behalf of Student Council and our students, it was amazing results. Their unofficial results are in. They broke their record by having $81,000 donated through their efforts over the week. So that's with their students, sponsorships. Again, that as Charity Week, you heard all the different charities that were supported in our community by their efforts. That's headed by our Student Council students, but again, Mr. Skip Clark does quite some behind the scenes and helping with that as well. So again, thank you to all of them. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Superintendent Wimmer on her report? All right, hearing none, we move then to our discussion items. And as I had foreshadowed in the policy committee update, we have a number related to policies. First, we have policies for first reading. Superintendent Wimmer, I think you're going to help walk us through these items.
Yeah, if you take a look, so as part of our policy work, we have an ongoing review cycle. We formally reviewed the 200 series and the 700 series. We've been working on things, alignment, standardizing, the use of school board, the use of superintendent versus district administrator. You can imagine as policies are touched over time, sometimes there's some cleanup on those pieces, and sometimes there's some changes to some content. In review, we've listed several policies that we have no recommendation for change. Then we have 2 policies, 723, 731.1, that we just recommend formatting, spacing, commas, just some technical fixes, and then really digging in things that we request or recommend a change to content. 166 was a policy regarding board member communications that you've seen. The policy committee brought this forward to the full board for input prior to creating that draft. So you see it's a lot of new language in green. And again, you might remember having seen that, having input on that prior to its formal development. Any questions from board members on that 166 around communications? Great. The next series was 200 around administration. Again, the fixes in there is 224, 225.1 to use the word school board versus just board. in that, so cleaning up those pieces. Any questions on the 200 series recommendations? Great, and then the 700 series, 742, again, standardizing school board throughout the document. 751, when we were talking about it at policy, John caught it. We cleaned up our language around the vans. John, thank you for catching that. We had some spacing, some things around the van plus the driver and how many passengers and vans that the district owns. And then we really needed to enter into a discussion regarding walking distance. Right now, we have a variety of walking distances that you see in yellow, and where that is confusing is when we have a split household. We have a different walking distance for a kindergartner than we do for others in the family. So I will run a bus to that stop and I'll pick up one of your kids and leave the others behind. So we're talking about making that standard, but we are still waiting on some of the bus company numbers on that. We've had them run numbers around what if we moved everything to 1.0 walking distance or a 1.25 for that elementary group of kids. The committee was very comfortable with leaving our 4K students at that very small margin of walking, and then our older students at a little bit increased, but still keeping it kind of in graduated stages for that. So I don't have those numbers from the bus company because we were looking at the total impact to families as well as projected costs prior to formalizing. But are there any questions or comments from others regarding the walk distances?
I think one of the things we wanted to do is look at to see how many parents or families or children might be impacted if we changed. And so that data will be very, very helpful. But chances are they're not going to, and I'm speaking for myself here, chances are they're not going to change wildly from these distances.
Right. So just as a reminder to all the board members, we don't have obligation for transportation until you hit that 2-mile mark. The district chooses to segment those by, their age, their grade bands, and again, bears that cost of transportation just because, we had a lot of discussion around just the size around kids and the distance and how long it would take them to get to school, when it's cold, when it's optimal conditions. So everyone in that committee was very comfortable with keeping those very low, not wildly changing or saying, oh, we're taking it up to what the statute allows, but more just trying to clean up that one little piece on behalf of our elementary families. Any other questions on that? That's a path we'll continue. As soon as I get those numbers updated, I'll share them with the board so we can reflect on those and make a final recommendation in that piece of the language. The other piece, 760, 761, 763, we added a title. There's a USDA section, so we cleaned that up, as well as a reference to superintendent versus district administrator. We standardized that. We cleaned up some typos that were embedded in there as well, so you'll see that on those. Any questions on the last of those pieces? I would recommend, there's no immediate questions, feedback, that we'd go ahead and agenda these for our second reading to come before the board in those categories.
Right. Any other thoughts? Any objections to having this brought forward for a second reading? Hearing none, that's the path we will take. Excellent. All right, if that concludes that first agenda item, we'll move then to the next policy, which is, and this is where we need board input, Policy 119, High School Configuration Review Process. Superintendent Wimmer.
Yeah, let me just start. The Policy 119 is around high school configuration review. We're unique in that we have 2 high schools under one roof in the state. So oftentimes communities have more than one high school. It's just rare that they are situated under one roof. We have a very specific policy around what it would take to explore that question. This question was asked as part of the facilities work and facilities engagement work that we had done. But at the time, the board did not want to commingle that question as part of the overall referendum. So we do need to kind of get ready and ask ourselves that question. We had a really good conversation, though, on a couple pieces. One, it asked for a non-binding referendum, and I have some pieces in policy around it running with a governor or a presidential election, which in our conversation, we said, we can see why. I think it was John who was saying, like, yep, because they're trying to get as much engagement as possible. You're trying to steer it towards those pieces. I kind of get that why, maybe that exists. But it's also delaying us in kind of moving through that conversation or having that piece of the puzzle. We then further explored around, do we have the authority to place a non-binding referendum question on a ballot? And because there were just some restrictions put on municipalities that they cannot place a non-binding question on a referendum, so we engaged in a couple legal opinions. And it was interpreted in the first legal opinion of, you could, and kind of the why are you doing it? And we're like, okay, let's make sure we get a little more definitive. So I did talk with Allison Buchanan of Quarles and Brady regarding our authority to put a non-binding referendum question on the ballot. She said, same thing. She goes, there is nothing that identifies us in statute that prohibits us from doing it. It's those other entities that were called out and said they specifically cannot. So maybe they forgot about us, maybe they don't spell us out specifically, but there's nothing, she said, but you need to ask yourselves around what's your purpose for doing that. If this is a non-binding referendum, if you're trying to engage people, what are your other efforts around that? Because to place a referendum, we will incur costs. So if you're on a ballot with other things, great, you split the cost of running that election across other parties, but you're also incurring legal costs to do that. Now, with that said, I would also incur costs to run a survey of my community in those pieces. So if the board would like, I can get a little bit more of a target of what would that cost to run that and do that, or are we better served putting our efforts into a survey? I felt that we had a really robust facilities plan to engage people in the community and different groups across some of that work, and the policy calls for that, but we also talked about some of the things, we'd like to survey our own families and our students and things of that nature. So really, what direction would the board like to go on that non-binding referendum piece? I'd like to hear thoughts from everyone. And again, it's just processing this first time, so I always put that out. This is a discussion item. This discussion item is not put on the agenda to start that discussion, or 4 weeks later, it's going to be a formal presentation because it notes that in the policy. This is to talk about the policy and what the board would like to see, so before we kind of get into that. So with that said, I'll turn it to the board for discussion.
I was going to say, I think also part of the process here is to understand if, depending on what we think about the non-binding referendum requirement, we can, the policy committee, the board, we could engage in changing the language. If we like the process, then there's no reason to change the language. So this input is really going to help the policy committee to understand, is there work for the policy committee to do or not? What I would say about the non-binding referendum requirement, again, I believe this policy is about 10 years old. It was adopted in March of 2015. So I wasn't on the board at the time, but I would agree. I think the idea of that non-binding referendum for gubernatorial, presidential, those are normally high turnout elections. And so I think the idea was that you would get a lot of community input. But I also agree that would we need, want, or desire to wait until one of those times? Can we begin the process now or execute it without having to wait for that? The one thing I would say, I on the one hand, I like the idea of a referendum, but what I like a little bit better about a survey is a referendum, we're going to get yeses and nos. With a survey, we could get richer input, and depending on how it was constructed. And so I'd be open to the idea of a survey instead, but I think I would like to see the board have some assurance that whatever the survey methodology would be, that we would try to get as much input as possible to try to, if we were to replace it. That's my input. Other members, other board members, input, thoughts.
Specifically around
Chris,
that
can I jump
referendum.
in?
Yeah.
Of course, Mr. Jenkins, go ahead.
Sure. So I read through this document, and funny enough, I believe that this was put in place when my own mother was on the school board once upon a time. And I asked her what her methodology was, and she pretty much summarized it by saying, well, we wanted to make sure that the community was apprised and everybody was happy, which is fair enough. But that being said, I feel like the process is rather cumbersome, and not that not that combining the high schools isn't a big deal, but while it might have been a bigger deal 10 plus years ago, my guess is that it might not be as much now, considering how much has changed in the last 10 years. So I guess my feedback in this process is I don't know if we really need a full task force of all the representatives that are listed here. I certainly see, everybody involved with the school should be a part of that process. But like if you were to ask me when I was mayor, hey, Mayor Jenkins, would you like to sit on this task force about combining high schools? I would tell you, well, it doesn't matter to me, right? I don't have stake in this as much as maybe the coaches of a sports team would. So I think we should look at the makeup of that task force if that's what we're going to do. And then the second is to your point about a non-binding referendum. I mean, a combination of high schools wouldn't affect every single person on the ballot. While we certainly would want to get as much buy-in and input as possible, to me, I don't know if we need to hear from every single voter that comes to an election, because this doesn't impact every single one of them. So that's my 2 cents, and anything that we can do, I think, to streamline this process to make it make sense for our present day, I think is beneficial. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Appreciate that. Other thoughts?
Well, while everyone gathers.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Melanie?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it does seem like a pretty cumbersome process as it is right now. I would have no problem if we wanted to switch it over to a survey rather than, for a referendum. I like the idea of getting more input, like you're saying, not just a yes or a no, and kind of engaging the community more that way. But I'm open.
One of the things, and again, it's just a first conversation as people kind of process and have thoughts. One of the conversation that came up at policy committee, and John and Chad and Chris were part of that conversation around what is it that we would want to see when, imagine that we put this on the agenda in the future. What are those items of information that you need us to be prepared for? Because we talked about what's the purpose of that conversation, and what were some of we started going down that rabbit hole of thinking about yourselves in those shoes around what needs to be presented to you on behalf, because then right now that process, and I think this part is solid, where we need to come and present to the board, and then the board needs a period of time to weigh whatever the contents of that presentation was, so that you can decide, do we go to a next step? And, is that worth going to that next step? What is it that you need to see? We talked about participation. We talked about enrollment. We talked about some of the financial pieces, some of the pieces that are certainly laid out in policy. But we started to think of and brainstorm, like, what are the additional items that you would need or want to see as board members to bring forward, even just to start having the conversation. So I just wanted to put that kind of bug in everyone's ear.
Melanie?
Yeah, I was going to, I know one thing that I had heard people say is with having the 2 schools, that there's more opportunity for students to participate in extracurriculars and sports. And so I guess I would want to know what that looks like for both scenarios, and also financial pieces like you had mentioned. Is there, what is the cost savings of going to one rather than 2? I think those are the main things that I can think of right now, but.
I would agree. I think those are 2 of the common things that I heard of as well. And I think just in general, the idea of what are things that we gain and what maybe are things that we sacrifice. But when I say sacrifice as well, my understanding with sports, I would really appreciate an understanding of, if we're saying fewer kids can participate in sports, that is something that I'd want to know more about. But also, are there ways to compensate for that? So for instance, how do club sports work? So in other words, what do we gain? What do we lose? But if we do lose anything, what are ways that we can perhaps compensate, if there are any? Just to get a clear picture. I think, like most things in the world, sometimes things come down to money. We might save money. I think taxpayers like saving money. But if we just understand what that cost is, we can just understand how deep that give up would be, if you know what I'm saying.
And I think sometimes too, you see it tonight. You saw a co-op team. We have the ability to co-op. We've co-op many teams. Wrestling's coming in as a co-op next year. Gymnastics is coming in as a co-op next year. You know, we have that ability right now. So what does and doesn't that identity mean for athletics? Because I think sometimes that's the biggest perception or myth sometimes that I talk about in the community when people are like, well, I heard these numbers are going, no, not necessarily, but here's some things that we've done. So those are interesting. We did talk about too, I think it might have been John, talking about surveying our own students and families who are most immediately impacted. We could launch with that as a piece of the puzzle first. It's very easy through Skyward and our student systems to do an internal first. Is that something, we didn't really flesh that out at the table at the time, but would we want to do that as that part of the first conversation and say, what's the interest for the students all the way down to like middle school and in? What's that immediate interest as a piece of the puzzle? I remember you talking about that, John, like we need to talk with people most impacted.
It just seemed like a kind of an obvious choice to kind of get the insider scoop on, you know, what the students, what the families all think, you know, if there is a way to do it, you know, easier through that avenue. And I mean, should be relatively cheap, right? I mean,
Yeah, to your point, we already have the systems. It would be just the cost of time putting that together, and we could bring that to the table as part of that initial and say, there is interest, or whoa, this, you know, here's some of the immediate feedback. That might help us tailor what that next step looks like too.
And I know we'd mentioned it about the kind of impact on students not being able to participate. Do we have kind of an audit of, you know, from our athletic department, what students might not be able to work with it? I mean, if this was ever to go through, I mean, if they were not able to participate in sports or something like that, because I know we have a lot of co-op sports and, but I mean, football is probably a large, baseball, you know, some of the bigger ones. How would we navigate those and allow students to participate, you know, as much as they would like to?
Yeah, and what's interesting, even reaching down, our youth teams, I say our loosely, they're the community youth teams. They might use Junior Spartans, Junior Sons. They're not actually our organizations, but football has already combined. So they're coming up as a combined entity. So responding to and moving with that. But as you said, what's that impact for? Right now I'm running, you know, 4 basketball teams. There's so many seats on that bench. And what does that look like? What is that impact for that? And to your point, I think, Chris, around, so then what other opportunities could be designed for? One thing that we run, not part of any sports, is boys volleyball. And they'll do a short run fall, like some teams, some fun brackets, a tournament, and it culminates in homecoming week. You know, what are the opportunities of that nature and exploring those?
Yeah, I just want to add on, like, I like what John was saying about, you know, engaging the people that are most affected, because is the whole community really going to have an opinion on it? You know, I mean, maybe some.
They'll all have an opinion.
Well, yeah, I suppose, but I mean, the people that are, like the students, the staff, the families that are actually plugged into the district, it would make the most sense to start there. And I honestly, like, I don't know if there's actually like a need to go beyond that personally.
I think we do need to go beyond, because I think some of the points I've heard were from outside of the district. I mean, just West Bend lifers that have been here forever, want to support the team, you know, want to cheer for, think that bringing it together would be, you know, kind of cohesive for the whole community, kind of cheer for one team instead of kind of a rivalry between East and West. I mean, not that that's always a bad thing, but, you know, you can see the point. I mean, I remember growing up and everybody went to the high school football team and cheered on the one high school team. So it was kind of a cool atmosphere. So
I'm open to whatever.
but initial engagement, I think, you know, the easiest route would be, I think, the students and parents, staff, whatever.
Yeah, I think that would be really easy, like you said, just to even kind of launch the dialogue. So we can start putting together, based on that conversation, based on tonight, and kind of based on, just reach out as you think of those things, and we'll kind of put together a list of here's what we think should be included in kind of starting that dialogue for the team. And I'll get kind of what would be those implications financially if I went to a larger scope survey. How could I execute that versus some costs on referenda? And I could even sketch out timelines. Because I think right now, once the facilities work is cleared, that's what I get most when I'm out in the community is when are you asking that question? When are you asking that question? So I can sketch out those things. So
This is helpful, I think. So kind of two fronts. We're giving some thought to what we might do in the future. With regard to the policy itself, I think
Correct.
this is good feedback that we need to take back to the policy committee as it relates to, do we change it, tweak it, keep it the same, delete it, various options.
Yeah.
But that's something for us to consider.
So what I'd like to do is kind of give them the feedback that I've heard through committee, and tonight I'd like to make this a discussion item on our next agenda for us to bring forward a little bit more of those ideas articulated, a little more meat on those bones, if you will, on topic, so that we can kind of figure out where we're at and what steps we might need to take. And again, grounding that as far as the policy, not scheduling it as the first formal discussion on topic, but more around process.
Policy.
And policy and setting us up for success there.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Thank you.
Clearly more to come. Thank you. All right, we move then to policy 830, use of facilities. Superintendent Wimmer? Oh, I'm sorry.
We actually,
A tag team tonight.
This one's under facilities, so Tim Harder did a lot of background. This was a topic of a conversation brought forward by a fellow board member, just who's experiencing it as a user. The 800 series is actually up for review next year, but we push this one in. We don't have draft language. What Tim did was scout kind of current practice, area practice, and we had a discussion around kind of where do we want to go. So that's why you see some pieces and some background. So Tim will walk you through kind of what he's found so that the board can again share and express opinions and thoughts so we can get some direction.
Great. Mr. Hatter, I'm so sorry I didn't see you
That's
there.
all right. I would have been fine sitting back there. It would have been okay, Mr. Zweigert.
Good evening.
So good evening, board. So interesting enough, I had already started looking into this when I took over my new role, talking with Dave Ross, our previous director. And in your board document online, there's a variety of different documents. The one really is an analysis of our policy compared to some other different school districts in the area. And so when I went into this looking at this, and then when a board member had reached out to me, we had some of the similar questions. Really what we are looking for is feedback around a couple of different areas. There are some things in there that we've already suggested, and I think the group at policy had already shared as a good idea. We have some oddities in how we rent some spaces. Like you can rent the hallway behind the auditorium. So, little things like that we can clean up. But certainly what I've found in my short time of overseeing facilities and working with our team here is it's a very confusing policy. And so I think the first piece that we are looking feedback on is on page 2 is around the number of groups and how they're set up. And if you look there, we have 8 groups with different pricing tiers, and only 3 of those 8 groups actually get charged a fee outside of custodial. And so majority of our groups who use our facilities here do not get charged a facility fee to use that. They only get charged the custodial fee if we don't have somebody on staff that day for a different event, or it's within our normal hours at that point in time. When you look at the other different policies that are out there from other districts, you see a range of anywhere of 3 to 5. Our recommendation is to look at a 4 or a 5 tier piece and make it very clear what group you sit into. I forget if it was John or Dr. Temez who brought up that, well, look, there's churches in 2 different groups. So which one do I align to? Because certainly if I'm making the case of renting your facility, I'm going to go with whichever one is cheaper at that point in time. And it gets very hard for the people who are coming in and making choices on this. And so one of the pieces of that we're looking for is feedback on the number of groups and working to narrow that down and then realign our fees of who what pays, what group pays. Our conversation at the policy committee was around that, there aren't as many groups who pay here. And that is not the norm when you go and you look at other school districts around us in any way, shape, or form. And so that's the first area that we would be looking feedback on is the number of groups and who should potentially pay. I'll pause there if there's any questions or comments.
Well, I think the first comment, just having gone through this the first time at the policy committee, was it's just reading through it. I looked at it and thought, gosh, this must be a near nightmare to administer. This really, in my opinion, should be simplified. Now, if you were to say there is great purpose in having 8 and it makes sense, I would say something else. But to me, I think we just have to be purposeful because we have to think about the individuals who administer this. So that's my initial feedback. As to exactly how many, I certainly would be interested in hearing the administration's proposal at some point. But fewer seems to be better, as long as they're meaningful and easier to administer.
Right.
Other thoughts, questions, comments?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, I know we were discussing during the meeting that the different fees, and, you know, we're a not-for-profit company here, and I didn't disagree, I slightly disagreed with Dr. Temez, and but I think we came to an agreement that the fee structure shouldn't be really different, should just be what it is. You know, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I know that's, you know, we were kind of discussing that there shouldn't be a different fee for different things. It doesn't make any sense if the cost is, we're not also, you know, it costs something to run that portion of the facility. I know I did throw out the thought of resident versus non-resident. If anybody was going to get a higher rate, it would be a non-resident that doesn't subsidize with taxes. So I'll just keep that out there.
Well, and I'll fill in on that a little bit on the fee side. So your districts who see 4 and 5s, group 1 is your school district, right? That's our events here. 2 through 5, 2 through 4 typically pay something, unless there's an asterisk around this is a partnership or the district signs a separate MOU. Most of those groups pay something at that point in time. When you start to look at our current policy, you have to get to group 5 to pay. So many of them are community groups, some are not community groups, but when you see groups 4 and 5, group 5 is probably, when you look at other districts, or group 4 is literally the non-resident, you know, private company, profit-making company who is paying the highest fee at that point in time, and it works at scale up. You know, there's a variety of different groupings in there where there is no charge for a facility fee piece, and even then going back and making sure we're accurately, you know, pricing out what we're charging for. We're not in the business of making money, but covering our costs for the events. We talked a little bit about, we have some tools on the operational side to figure out, I can tell you how much it costs to run the lights in this room for an hour, and build that into our fees. You talk about a lot of those pieces. The 3 big costs when you talk about facility usage is wear and tear, number 2 is staffing, and number 3 is your utilities at that point. And so revisiting some of that. So any other feedback on the pricing piece?
I think generally speaking, pricing-wise, I think I'm in agreement with the other gentleman who participated on the policy committee meeting. We're not a convention center where it is our business to do this for a profit. At the same time, I do feel like whatever our actual costs are, I envision if someone has to be here diverted from their normal responsibilities to set up folding chairs or clean afterwards, I really do think that that's reasonable for us to request, really from any group. I think, Mr. Donaldson, that's your point as well. We could all discuss whether or not, well, if it's a for-profit entity that is able to pay, maybe it should be more. But I would think just as a guiding principle, if there are true out-of-pocket costs, then I think that's just reasonable to seek from any group, really.
All right. And then,
Mr. Swiger?
Please, Mr. Jenkins.
Yeah, so I was the one that had brought forth this request, and as some of you might know, I run or I assisted running 2 different nonprofits, both of which utilize the school district's assets in one shape or another. And even when I heard Mr. Harder's breakdown of those communities that have maybe 5 different groups that they put people into, it still ends up being, in a sense, 3. I mean, you're either a completely school use, you're a nonprofit getting some sort of discounted price maybe, or maybe a youth group, and then you're a for-profit, right, that is getting a different amount. So in my mind, no matter how we break it out, it sounds like there's, in a sense, 3 categories that we're trying to put these groups into. And I absolutely agree that even I, as a nonprofit, you should be charging me that bare minimum that it takes to keep the lights on, to have the place staffed and all that. I absolutely agree with that. But I do think that there should be some sort of difference between those groups that are nonprofits, that are, in a sense, doing something with the auspices that deserves that nonprofit status, versus a business like a West Bend Mutual that's coming in to rent it for, conference. So at the end of the day, I don't know if I care whether we have 5 or 3, but it seems to me like we're always kind of putting people into these 3 tiers, which is why the original policy had 3 tiers at the end of the day. So I feel like that's what we're leaning towards. It's just a matter of how we get there.
And
John?
I guess I just don't understand, how we can charge our community taxes to pay for the facilities already and then try to charge them more than what it actually costs to run that facility for, let's say, an hour. That's where I get hung up, because we already, we're taxed pretty heavily, in this community. I pay my fair share, and I'm sure a lot of people do. And to pay for those taxes already for the school budget and to run the facilities and everything else, asking anything outside of what it actually costs to run that is just, looking for profit from our community that's already getting taxed for those facilities in the first place. So that's where I had a hard time asking or wanting to put a higher price on different things, because it costs what it costs. You're not making extra money off the community unless there's a really good reason why we're doing it. And I would really have to be convinced. So that's, I'm not here to profit off the community any more than we were to tax them. I think that's what the taxes are for. They pay for the community centers, and they pay for the school districts and the buildings and everything else to keep the lights on and the salaries for the people. And, outside of that normal working, those normal working hours and normal working times, then I think that's reasonable to ask that cost of what it actually costs for those buildings.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts? I'm sensing commonality around the understanding of what are our actual out-of-pocket costs. That seems to be universal. And I'm not necessarily here either to say, wow, for the for-profits, let's triple it or anything of the sort. But I think that's a great guiding principle to say, let's talk about what those out-of-pocket costs are and at least charge those on a common basis. I did have a different question surrounding the number of tiers for a different reason, that is priority. And so I wasn't sure if that's something you're getting to.
We will get to that.
Then I'm going to hold my question.
So I think I heard the feedback on that. I know we talked about it policy. There's 5 groups into, Chris's point. There's only 3 who get paid, right? Or that actually pay in. And I think, right now there's a lot of groups, for example, we talked about athletic facilities and prepping fields that there is no cost to them because of the way the current policy is. There's a fixed cost to that. And if I have to prep said baseball field an extra 25 times, that's taking away from cutting the grass in the spring. So we will bring some recommendations on that. The other piece gets into something that has kind of played out a little bit over the years here in a variety of different forms, is priority and booking in the district. And so I went back, I asked Dave Ross, I went back and looked at some different things. It's been all over the board. And some years we were giving the outside group that John referenced, who's the private company, the same opening date to book as our high school athletic program is. And so what we would like to write into the policy is some sort of a tiered opening of the calendar so that our kids get priority first, our community groups get priority second, and maybe the non-resident groups get priority third or something like that. The other piece that's a very big piece of the Silver Lining Arts Center that's been a historical practice but doesn't exist necessarily in a policy is it's always kind of been traditional practice that if Mr. Zweigert had the auditorium the last 2 weeks in March, he kind of got first dibs on it the last 2 weeks in March the next year again. And being that facility is unique, and we have people who will try to reach out in, a year, 2, 3 years, and we have some groups that have been in that facility, I think, since the high school was built, on the same 2, 3 dates. We would really like to look at our kids' programming comes first, and then those community groups come second as a priority piece. For example, we have a case this year where we have a group of our students who can participate in 2 co-curriculars. They actually overlap with each other at the middle school, driving enrollment down. So our advisors came to us and asked, hey, could we get a little bit of a different time slot in the Silver Lining Arts Center? We went back to our community partner and said, hey, here's why we're doing this, but we would give you their time slot 2 weeks or 3 weeks earlier. And when they understood it, And as long as our kids still participated in their event, because it's a shared partnership, they were very happy to do that. They understood our kids come first and that schools are for the purpose of educating our kids and providing those opportunities. So we're also looking for feedback on that. That practice that's kind of there, but really isn't written in policy, and I'd like to write it in stone so it's not what Tim says that year, Dr. Wimmer the next year, or John Donaldson says the third year at that point. So any feedback would be appreciated.
I think the philosophy of our kids come first is paramount, and I think that makes all the sense in the world. The idea of first running a calendar saying what does the district need those facilities for and on what dates, I think that's incredibly important. I'm thinking at our company with the use of the Prairie Center, we follow something very similar to what you outlined, and that is we go to our internal company operations to say what business needs do we have for it. Then after that, we open it to the community. We will first contact the folks who have that, every year and somewhat give them first dibs under the theory that perhaps they have an event that's most successful in the community when there's regularity to it. But the order of operations should first be, what do we need for kids? Then to the community, and I don't have a problem doing the first dibs. I think as long as we don't have partners that abuse it, and I think also in the event that if there's some change where, gosh, there was an unexpected change, we now need that facility for student use, that would trump it. We would of course try to avoid that at all costs if we could, but I think students come first, and I do not have a problem with then going to the community to do it with more regularity after that and give first dibs when it's practical. That's just my thought. Other thoughts?
He
John?
just sparked a thought. Do we block like a weekend or a couple days throughout the months of school just in case that people can't book, like unforeseen, like, oh, we forgot to book this, or this came up and we needed an event here for the school?
So we're trying to get away from that. However, what for the first time we are doing next year is I think it's now 3 years running, I'm looking at Dr. Wimmer, when we've had a day off in December, it's some poor elementary school's concert up in that auditorium. So what we're looking at is you would come in and book your ideal date, and then there would be a backup date. Typically where we're blocking off to, and some of this feeds into the facility usage and the charges, is we're having a hard time staffing when our facilities are used as much as they are. Anytime you throw a gym on, like a Green Tree and a McLean, the high school, those buildings, I could open them up 7 days a week, 6 a.m. to 10 o'clock at night, somebody would rent them. So we will try to we are working with our athletics teams to hold a block of time, and then they have to come in and put their schedules in behind the scene. We're also working, we had a unique case where we have a outside group using our auditorium for a theater show this spring. We had another community member who said, hey, I need a place to put 300 people sitting in chairs. Well, there's not a lot of those places in this community, and it didn't work out in the timing, but basically both sides were okay that we were just gonna drop down the curtain and they were gonna have a podium up front and stand there, and I could talk to the 300 people if I wanted to, and it wasn't hurting either group, and we get double use out of the theater. I think our back and forth communication, Laura, who manages that for us, does a really good job. So we are trying to build some of those basic things in there. Athletics are always one. We always end up bumping somebody last minute when kids make regionals and sectionals. That's right in our policy that says when you get your booking, that says if the district has a need, we have the right to bump you, but we will also try to find you an additional space if we can. Very rarely do we not find you a space unless it's the auditorium, because it's the only one I have at that point.
And you see that generally just in winter months where you're having to make up games. Maybe we've had to call it for weather, things of that nature, and they're working across networks. So rarely, given the number of facilities, do we run into an issue where we can't just reschedule, recoordinate, provide an alternate space.
Spring is probably the other one with baseball and softball fields. We've had to bump some of our youth softball club teams around here because we've had to make up said softball or baseball game. And they know that, and we will work with them to find that appropriate spot if we can.
Other thoughts? Other questions for us?
I think I have enough to bring a draft
Okay.
policy back in the future, so I appreciate the feedback.
Great, so we'll see that at a policy committee meeting or a board meeting? We'll set that.
Either way, yep.
Either way, excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we are on to future agenda items and our board meeting calendar. So here's a preview of upcoming meetings. All the meetings that I will talk about would be scheduled to take place here at the Education Service Center. So Curriculum Committee meeting would take place both on March 11th and then one on April 22, both 4:30 p.m. And our next regular board meetings would be March 17, April 14, and April 28, all at 5:30 p.m. and again, all at the Education Service Center. We encourage the public to check for the official meeting postings as the date, time, or location might change. That is our board meeting calendar. Any questions on the calendar? Are there any other items then for follow-up and communication? All right, thank you. Hearing none, we've reached the end of our planned agenda, except we have a matter that is appropriate to discuss in executive session. So I would move to adjourn into executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and take any such action if necessary based on its discussion, namely performance evaluation. That is my motion. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Donaldson. We have a motion and second to adjourn into executive session. Any final discussion? Hearing none, I will call the roll. Dr. Temez.
Yes.
Ms. Lang is absent. Ms. Kruger.
Yes.
Mr. Jenkins.
Yes.
Ms. Ergot. Yes. Mr. Swigert votes yes. Mr. Donaldson.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries, and we're adjourned into executive session. Thank you to all those who attended tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting.